One man forced himself to act tough, demanding, "Don't think you can scare us with a gun. You wouldn't dare kill us." This statement resonated with the crowd. In many countries, soldiers would shoot civilians, but American troops were forbidden to do so. However, the instinctive fear of guns still cowed everyone. The man's defiant words were just an act. One of the officers shouted, "All of you shut up! We've wasted a lot of time on your petty requests. Do you know how many people we could have saved instead?" The tough-talking man was not convinced. He said angrily, "Then let's go straight to our destination. This is the fastest way." His words garnered the approval of the other refugees. They hollered, "That's right! This is the fastest way! Let's go! Let's hurry up and continue the journey!" All they wanted was to reach a safe place as soon as possible. Although they didn't know how safe the promised refuge would be, at least they had a goal. However, the army kept stopping to help others, frustrating those already under their protection. The officer said sternly, "Shut up! If you can't get with the program, we will not put you into the car at the first station. If anyone else is dissatisfied with our decisions, please leave now. We are responsible for the safety of more people than just you here." The tough-talking man kept quiet. After all, he had nowhere else to go. The officer wearily regarded the people in the convoy. Most of them were calm. Even if they were afraid, they would not oppose the army head-on. Only a few of them had problems with their mental faculties. However, one person's panic could always spread and cause a large-scale meltdown. Someone suddenly shouted in fear, pointing toward the surrounding hills. "There! The monsters are coming again!" Another person said, "Quick, kill them!" The officer replied, "Don't be afraid. Those are dogs. Dogs don't bite people." It was very common for stray dogs to appear in the city. However, some of them had bite marks on their bodies. Their eyes were solid white or red. Clearly, they had been infected. The strange thing was, these zombie dogs traveled with some ordinary dogs. Neither group attacked the other. Instead, they all just growled at the people in the convoy. Two young women fearlessly walked toward the dogs. "Be careful!" The officer attempted to pull them back. However, the two young women seemed to have gone mad. One said, "Get out of our way. Dogs are humans as friends. They wouldn't harm us." The big dogs were wagging their tails and whimpering. It was as if they had recognized the young women as their masters. One young woman said, "Good boy. See, I told you." The other said proudly, "There is absolutely no way that these dogs would harm us. They will become our loyal guards and protect us." Halfway through her words, she suddenly realized that everything in front of her seemed to have turned upside down. The young woman said, "My head." She realized as she died that her neck had been torn through and that her head had fallen off. This scene horrified the people, and they all screamed in terror. "Ah!" Charles, watching from afar, did not have any sympathy for the young woman. "You have an affinity for animals, but unfortunately, you're a little stupid. Do you think that zombie dogs are like ordinary beasts?" The zombie dogs also dismembered the other young woman in short order. The officer could only order, "Fire! Fire!" Shockingly, he did not feel the slightest bit sad about the deaths of the two women. Instead, he felt a mild sense of satisfaction. Could it be that I'd become heartless as well? He wondered. However, when he considered that the two of them and the loudmouth man were among the convoy's troublemakers, he dismissed this thought. He still had to protect and save more people. He didn't have the time to care about those who would not help save themselves. Leaving behind the fresh corpses, the zombie dogs all ran off and hid in nearby alleys. Seeing this, the officer's heart sank. If they pursued the animals, they would likely suffer heavy losses. However, if he didn't kill these dogs, they would likely follow the convoy. The words of discontent among the crowd grew louder. They complained, "Look, these monsters are still spying on us. If we don't leave, these monsters will definitely eat us up. Let's go, quickly. If there are still people hiding nearby, I reckon they will all be eaten by these beasts. Even if you still intend to conduct a search and rescue operation, don't stay here." The zombie dogs occasionally exposed their snarling heads. making the entire team extremely anxious. The voices begging to leave became louder and louder. Even the army could not ignore the will of so many people united in desperation. A motorcycle suddenly stopped before the convoy, stirring up dust. The crowd yelled, "Be careful! Danger! Come quickly, there are monsters here!" Seeing a newcomer appear, the soldiers were torn. If it wasn't for the fact that they still had to protect the people behind them, they would have immediately rushed out to rescue the stranger. Then they saw two of the zombie dogs lunge at the newcomer. The soldiers wanted to shoot, but the zombie dogs were too fast, making it difficult for them to aim. Just as they thought they were going to witness another tragedy, a motorcycle sped past. Light flashed off a quickly drawn blade, and the two zombie dogs were cut in half. Then Charles addressed the crowd. "These zombie dogs don't have their own intelligence. There must be some high-level zombie dogs or other spiritual monsters nearby controlling them. If we can kill them, these dogs will break without attacking." As Charles spoke, he removed the contents of the zombie dogs' heads. Witnessing the miraculous actions of the newcomer, everyone was shocked. Who was this person? While everyone else remained in a daze, the officer immediately reacted. The officer said, "Welcome, friend. My name is Tony Hughes. I'm the officer in charge here. You just said that there are higher-level zombie dogs or spirit-controlled monsters. What do you mean?" Charles explained. "Unless they are very high-level zombies, these mutated creatures have no intelligence. They can't gauge the strength of an enemy. They only know how to bite when they see prey. Considering that they retreated, there must be spirit-controlling monsters nearby." As Charles spoke, he parked the motorcycle on the side of the street. Then he rushed toward the alleys, sheltering the zombie dogs. Hughes' chest tightened. "Be careful!" He did not know how strong the stranger was. He had rushed ahead so recklessly. Wasn't this asking for death? Then he saw Charles advance on the zombie dogs in a small alley. They hungrily pounced on Charles, barking crazily. His blade quickly silenced them. The ferocious zombie dogs were unable to withstand a single slash from Charles's blade. In less than 10 seconds, the alley was cleared. Charles explained calmly, "It's very difficult for a spirit-controlling monster to possess a highly intelligent life form. At most, it can convey a psychological prompt to its target, affecting the other party's actions. These creatures are usually very timid because their bodies are weak. We need to get to the place where the monsters are the densest to root them out." Everyone was stunned to see the fearsome zombie dog so swiftly eliminated by this mysterious man's blade. Was he even human? At this moment, a huge dog that was at least 9 feet long suddenly appeared. It opened its mouth wide and bounded toward Charles. Everyone felt tensed at the sight of this. The larger the monster, the stronger the visual impact. Everyone feared for Charles, certain they would see him die in the jaws of this giant beast. But Charles didn't seem to have any intention of escaping. "Get ready to shoot," Hughes ordered. He hesitated giving the order to fire to prevent any accidental injuries to Charles when he realized that Charles wasn't going to back down. Seeing this behavior, Hughes assumed that the other man was scared silly. However, the way Charles killed the zombie dogs with such ease just now gave him confidence that Charles knew what he was doing. Charles created an invincible avatar for himself by shouting, "Karmic Fire Talisman." Strange, deep blue flames blanketed the huge dog's body, eliciting a painful howl. The sound was nothing like a dog's barks. It was more like the roar of a ferocious beast. Clang! The blade flashed, and half of the zombie dog's head was cut off, revealing the crystal core within. Dumbfounded by Charles's strength, many of the people could not help but vomit at the bloody scene before them. Others cried, "So powerful! So fast!" Hughes approached Charles and said, "Thank you very much for helping us." "It's not over yet," Charles shouted. A flying dagger suddenly left his hand. Under the power of the item-controlling talisman, the flying dagger easily pierced through a silently encroaching black monster that looked like mud. After killing it, Charles calmly said, "It's all right now." Hughes was stunned for a moment. He said, "I've never seen such skills. It's really an eye-opener." Charles revealed a trace of a smile. Do you want to learn? I can teach you. Hughes was surprised. Are you sure you want to teach me? Charles nodded. A descendant of an ancient power family taught me. His dream is to popularize these techniques and give everyone the ability to protect themselves. Unfortunately, this cultivation technique is very dangerous. Otherwise, he would have spread it to the public already. The image of a saint could easily make others feel inferior. In this post-apocalyptic era, assuming such an image was akin to courting death. That was why Charles wasn't greedy for recognition. If Neil was willing to be the figurehead of the movement, Charles would let him do it. Hughes looked at Charles with suspicion. Is this friend you were talking about yourself? He questioned why a person who was willing to make others stronger would say that there was someone else behind it. Charles explained, That is not my mission. I'm only helping this friend out a little. Hughes said, Sure. You're just helping some mysterious friend. Charles did not know whether to laugh or cry. I'm telling the truth. He's in the city right now. I'll take you to see him later. He has worked so hard to improve his cultivation method, I don't dare to take credit. Of course he didn't dare to take credit, or else he would be the saint, who the people would eventually destroy. Hughes finally seemed to believe Charles. No matter what, your actions are very admirable. I wonder if you'd be interested in joining the military and contributing your strength to protect the innocent? Charles shook his head and said, I'm not interested. I'm here to confirm something with you. Have you been using this method of evacuation the whole time? Hughes asked. Is there a problem? Because the apocalypse had come on so suddenly, it was difficult for them to adjust. The ingrates were still biting back. The army knew that this method was very inefficient, but there was nothing they could do about it. The army would not give up on anyone. This was their core belief. Charles looked at the convoy behind him and thought of the convoy that was waiting for orders in the distance. He knew that the tragedy of his previous life was going to happen again. When the apocalypse had arrived, many people had devolved into wild beasts. However, some people still kept the light of human goodness burning. The army was like this. Perhaps some of the new soldiers had given up their integrity, but there were still many who held true to their posts and remembered that they were the people's protectors. He knew that all of this would change. Countless bloody lessons would teach the people that only by exercising absolute power could they maintain a small amount of order in this chaotic world. Charles said, Groups for search and rescue, groups in retreat. This strategy is sound enough, but this is too inefficient. If we use a swift rescue team to inform and gather the survivors in advance of the convoy, then we can integrate them into the main force without affecting efficiency. Hughes said, But we don't have this ability now. There are not many awakened people in the army. Wait, could it be that you want to? His eyes widened as he realized what Charles was saying. Could it be that he wanted to pass on the ancient power arts to everyone? Charles nodded and said, I was entrusted by someone to impart the ancient power arts cultivation method to the army. He wanted me to remind you that at this stage of his experiment, 20% of the people on the path of cultivation have died in the process. This method is very dangerous. Whether you want to pursue it or not, you guys decide. Hearing Charles's words, Hughes said righteously, A 20% death rate is no more terrifying than those man-eating monsters. Those who still comport themselves as soldiers are not cowards. Charles nodded. That was what he wanted to hear. If Neil's cultivation method was passed down to everyone from the beginning, then the relatives of those who died would blame Neil. However, if he trained soldiers first, then there would be no such worry. The 20% death rate was no deterrent. Even if some had to die, they would protect the citizens at all costs. And after Charles's improvements, the death rate was far below 10%. He kept this secret to prevent the army from spreading the news to civilians. One step at a time, one step at a time, one step at a time. If the army became the first group of people to cultivate the power arts, Charles would not become a hated enemy of the human race when he eventually killed Leonard Shaw. His hatred for Shaw was deeply engraved in his heart. Everything he did was part of his effort to kill him. A ripple suddenly disturbed the thunder energy in his body. It was Alice's distress signal. Within the Essence Talisman, there was a monitoring talisman. This was an Essence Talisman that could send thunder energy into another person's body and thereby detect the other party's movements. If Alice encountered danger, it would inflict a certain degree of stress upon the Essence Talisman. Then it let Charles decide whether he should return or not, based on the degree of danger. Charles thought, "It's urgent, but light. Moreover, it's active. This means that Alice hasn't encountered anything too dangerous. She just wants me to come back and help to make a decision." With this conclusion, Charles felt reassured. Anyway, he had almost finished his business there. He had wanted to give the army the message and earn the soldiers' trust. That way, he could get someone to help him take care of his younger sister and gain time to look for his parents. He said to Hughes, "If you're interested, come to the villa area of the new courtyard and look for me. I have something to do, so I'm leaving now." With that, he got on his motorcycle and left. A soldier came to Hughes' side and said, "Sir, should we trust him?" Hughes was silent for a moment before replying. "The address he gave us is one of the places we must go anyway. We need to meet someone there. It's just that we must go there earlier than expected." In the Villa district, Alice glared at the bodyguards gathered in front of her. "What do you guys want?" she asked angrily. The bodyguards had broken the door down. Obviously, they had come with ill intentions. In the post-apocalyptic era, compromising someone's layers of protection was akin to cold-blooded murder. The bodyguards ogled the girls who came out to see what was happening. The bodyguards leered as they said, "I never thought I would have the chance to meet such a beautiful girl. Looks like our luck is turning. We tricked Neil into leaving. We don't know when he will come back, so we need to get moving. We should have more time to play with these beauties. It's good to have some fun. Hurry up, let's do this." At that moment, a ball of water suddenly appeared and sent a bodyguard flying. The guard struck by the water ball was stunned, then cried, "She's a paranormal!" The other bodyguards looked afraid. They had seen paranormals attack before, and such powerful strength had left a deep impression. Then a stone-faced bodyguard said, "Wait, after a paranormal attack, how are you okay?" The guard who had been hit stood up and said in surprise, "It seems that becoming a power arts warrior is quite useful. Even paranormals can't defend themselves against us." The men's confidence increased greatly. A squat bodyguard shouted, "It's a pity that the gigolo boy isn't here. Playing with his woman in front of him would be even more exciting." "Ha ha 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 ha!" The guards laughed. The girls' faces turned pale from fright. Sister Bethany spread her arms and blocked their way, saying, "Stop this now, otherwise you'll be punished by God." Alice coldly added, "Get lost, or you will regret it." The stone-faced bodyguard laughed and said, "Looks like these girls are impatient. Since that's the case, let's have a taste of you first." The bodyguards had lost their better natures after gaining power. The girls had honed their powers, but their timid natures and lack of training still made them shiver. Just as Alice readied herself to fight, a stern shout came from outside the door. "What are you guys doing?" The bodyguards cried, "Miss Haley!" Everyone's breath caught as they saw Haley standing outside the door with two bodyguards beside her. The stone-faced bodyguard laughed and said, "We are here to ensure your safety. That's why we are interrogating these ladies. Everything is above board." Haley's face filled with anger when she heard this. Just as she was about to scold the men, a pale bodyguard laughed. "Miss Haley, we are loyal to you. We never thought that we would find a purpose after the apocalypse arrived." Hearing this, the anger on Haley's face curdled into fear. Celebrities rely on intelligence and an understanding of people to attain their positions. Haley now realized that she was only protected by these people because she was useful to them. Once she lost her value, they would abandon her without hesitation. Thus, she nodded and said, "You guys are being conscientious. I see." After saying that, she simply turned around and left. Penelope shouted, "Don't believe them! They are lying to you!" Harper cried, "They want to make us—" Before she could finish her sentence, she was punched hard in the abdomen. The rest of her words were stifled. A burly bodyguard said, "We're Miss Haley's life insurance. She believes us because she must." As he spoke, the bodyguard reset the broken door, erasing the evidence of a break-in. "Looks like we can buy more time." Miss Haley had already tacitly approved of their actions. They knew that even if Neil came back, she would cover for them. A chill raced down Alice's spine. She said, "Haley's letting you do this because she's afraid of losing your protection. She's also afraid that if you cannot vent your beastly desires on us, then you will vent your desires on her." Hearing Alice's words, Sister Bethany's eyes revealed a look of confusion. She had always looked at everything in the world with kindness, but what she had seen and heard in recent times made her doubt her view of the world. She'd originally thought that as long as she believed in God, everything would be okay, so she didn't need to think about things too much. But now, she couldn't help but doubt. Was God right? If this was God's test, then what was its meaning? Did God really want to see his loyal believers be defiled by such beasts? The bodyguards attempted to keep the girls calm, and therefore easier to control, saying, "Beauties, relax. We will make you feel comfortable." And, "In this precarious world, everyone struggles to live. Let us help you." Killing intent flashed in Alice's eyes. Even if she were to die, she could not let the invaders succeed. She had learned from Charles that when facing people who had become beasts, there was no place for sympathy. She could not hold back. Outside the villa, one of Haley's personal bodyguards said angrily, "Miss Haley, why do you trust them? Can't you see what they are trying to do?" Haley said, "If they do something wrong, they will be punished. This has nothing to do with me." Though her tone was cold, her heart was full of apprehension. When those bodyguards looked at her, their eyes felt familiar. They looked at her like the fans who had wanted to possess her, devour her. She used to enjoy that feeling of being the thing that people wanted but could not get. People saw her as a kind of prostitute, but she only sold the promise, the image of sex. She would never sell herself cheap like a common streetwalker. But the apocalypse had happened too suddenly. She wasn't prepared at all. She realized that if she didn't sell herself intelligently, she could end up in the same miserable state as those poor girls on the street at any time. She made up her mind. Haley thought, "I must find a strong person to cling to. With my beauty, I can keep anyone's heart in check. I'll deal with these people in the future once I'm secure." Anyone who looked down on her would have to pay the price. Imagine, these lowly people wanted to toy with her. There was no way. On his way home, Charles met Neil. "Why are you out here? Aren't you protecting that star?" Charles asked. Neil said, "I'm looking for traces of the army. Have you seen them?" Charles replied, "The army will come. There's no time to explain now. Something's happening at the house." He revved the motorcycle and drove on. Neil's expression changed. He turned around and started back as well. Alice had increased the alarm, making Charles anxious. The stone-faced bodyguard said, "These people are really difficult to deal with." The stone-faced bodyguard slapped Sister Bethany to the ground and then held her down. He began tearing her clothes into strips of cloth. "I want to kill her first." The others started to argue. "Idiot! If you have the ability, deal with the paranormal first. This paranormal is too slippery." Alice continuously summoned water fairy guards to delay their pace. However, she was only one person. If it were not for the internal strife among the guards, she would not have been able to hold on. Harper and Penelope were on the floor. A bodyguard was advancing toward Harper. Harper moaned painfully, her eyes shut. The guard laughed and bent over Harper's body. "Right, this should be the way. Don't resist and I will make you very comfortable." The bodyguard beside him tried to pull him away. "Let me go first. You go and deal with that superpowered woman." At that moment, Harper took out a dagger and stabbed it at the bodyguard. Blood splashed on the floor. The bodyguard looked at the dagger in his heart in disbelief. How could you?" He hadn't expected to die here. Harper shouted at Alice. "Alice, quickly kill me!" Alice was stunned. "What are you talking about?" Harper said, "Even if I die, I don't want to let these people get away with it. Kill us, and then let Charles take revenge. Otherwise, we will all die at their hands after being defiled and tortured." Alice felt painfully conflicted. Harper screamed at Alice, "If you don't kill me, I will hate you forever. These people deserve to die." Harper's words filled Alice's heart with pain. The whites of her eyes began to slowly turn scarlet. Alice suddenly raised her hand and waved it. A series of ice blades flew out, a technique only attainable by those who had reached Tier 3. The blades pierced the bodyguard attacking Harper. His blood dyed Harper's clothes red. There was not a trace of fear in Harper's eyes. She took the dagger and stabbed the dead bodyguard several times out of pure hatred. Looking at the battered Sister Bethany and Penelope, and then at Harper, who was filled with righteous fury, Alice despaired. Sister Bethany moaned as she slipped into unconsciousness. Anger blazed in the heart of the assaulted nun. She thought, "I have never questioned the tests that God has set before me, but why does he allow these beasts to do whatever they want?" A holy light faintly illuminated her body, causing the bodyguard tearing at her clothes to pause in confusion. Thunk! A sharp weapon made a sickening sound of piercing flesh. The bodyguard attacking Sister Bethany looked down at the spearhead protruding from his chest. He was instantly filled with fear. He wondered, I'm going to die? He was consumed by bitter regret. He had just obtained fabulous strength. Now he would die here without having the chance to use it. Suddenly Charles's voice roared, "All of you must die." Surveying the chaotic scene in the room, Charles's eyes turned red. Killing these beasts will be an insufficient punishment for their loathsome crimes. Seeing Charles return, Alice's eyes filled with tears. "Charles?" she said. No matter how dangerous the situation was, if Charles was here, things would be okay. "Are you also a guard?" The burly bodyguard was surprised that Charles had killed one of his companions. But the weapon in Charles's hand was gone, and the guard still held a baton. However, he suddenly realized that his body was on fire. "Ah! What is this?" The bodyguard shouted and rolled on the ground, trying to smother the flames. But the hellfire was not so easily extinguished. The flames rapidly devoured his body, leaving not even his bones behind. Charles grabbed the neck of the bodyguard closest to Alice. The bodyguard babbled in terror. You killed him! You!" But as Charles tightened his grip, the bodyguard could not make any sound at all. Charles shouted, "Refine!" The guard's head was completely refined in a moment, and Charles absorbed his true energy. The bodyguards cried, "Devil! You're a devil!" Seeing Charles looking like a cold-eyed god of slaughter, the bodyguards who had acted so arrogant moments earlier were scared out of their wits. One of them even kneeled and begged for mercy, saying, "I was wrong. We were wrong. We were just impulsive." The others couldn't mock him for admitting defeat. Cowed by Charles's powerful presence, their hearts were filled with fear. Charles kicked the bodyguard who was still standing and broke his knee. He showed no intention of stopping. The remaining invaders were terrified by Charles's implacable rampage. Two of them kneeled to surrender, while the rest of them tried their best to escape. Crack! 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 The bodyguards' cries of "Ah! Ay!" filled the room. However, after running just a few steps, a severe pain suddenly racked their legs, and they fell to the ground in agony. Charles sneered, "Letting you all die like this is too good for you, swine." Charles ruthlessly threw the remaining bodyguards, who had lost their ability to resist, into a writhing pile. After breaking their limbs, he took out a knife and slowly cut off their flesh, making them scream like pigs being slaughtered. They either begged for mercy or begged Charles to kill them. "Ah! Bastard! You will die a horrible death! I beg you, let me go! Just kill me! Kill me, please!" Watching the men howling in pain and fear, Harper felt a wave of disgust, but she resisted the urge to vomit. She picked up the dagger and continued to stab at their bodies. Charles said, "Don't kill them all at once. Let them watch each other die slowly. At that moment, Neil arrived at the residence. He was deeply shocked by the gory scene. His face turned pale. What happened? Neil asked. He had killed before, but the gruesome scene before him took his breath away. The guards desperately begged for Neil's help. They groaned, "Captain, save me! Captain, they want to kill us! Captain, he's an abyss devil! He's an abyss devil!" It was obvious how their wounds had been inflicted. He hadn't expected that the people he had instructed would do such things with the power arts he had taught them. However, Neil's eyes fell on Sister Bethany's tattered clothes, and then turned to Harper, whose face burned with resentment. His eyes flashed angrily. "You pigs. What did you do?" he asked. Hearing Neil's question, the despair in the bodyguards' eyes deepened. They knew that Neil would not save them. Alice said coldly, "If Charles had come back a little later, we would all be dead." Neil shook with fury. "Where is Haley? Didn't she notice anything happening here?" So many people were screaming. Haley should have been aware of the emergency. Alice said, "Of course she noticed, and chose to protect herself." Neil said, "I will go and find her." Seeing that Neil had no intention of saving them, the bodyguards wailed and begged with renewed intensity. "Captain, we were wrong! We were just confused for a moment. They are the real devils!" Charles came to Neil's side and said, "This is the reason why I advise you not to spread your skills so indiscriminately. If a person who gains power is not restrained enough, the evil in the depths of their hearts will be easily awakened." Neil asked, "How can we give them enough restrictions?" In his opinion, if a good person could suppress a bad person, there was hope. Put callously, if humans lost the ability to protect themselves, the result would be their extinction. However, Charles only said coldly, "You are not an idiot. Do you still need me to teach you?" Neil was not a saint. He was also not an idiot. He just hadn't wanted to think about the implications of his mission. Neil took a deep breath and said, "I understand," and strode toward Haley. Watching his back, Charles thought, "Neil, this is all I can help you with." Neil wanted to give the surviving humans a chance to protect themselves and to secure them a safe place to live. Charles had only pointed out an alternative path for him to reach the same goals. It could change Neil's life trajectory to a certain extent. As for how much he could change, Charles could only leave it up to fate. After Neil left, Charles assessed the situation. Sister Bethany showed signs of awakening, but in the end, she slipped back into unconsciousness. This puzzled him. He wondered, could it be due to insufficient origin energy? He saw Alice attempting to drag a corpse away. He hurriedly stopped her. "There's no need to clean the room. Maintain this state. Let them see it when they wake up." Alice was initially a little hesitant, but in the end, she nodded silently. Now was not the time to consider psychological trauma. If she could not clear this hurdle, then this kind of tragedy would very likely continue to happen. She cast a healing spell on all the girls. Harper came to Charles's side and asked, "How can I become stronger?" Charles replied, "If you want to do it quickly, you will not be able to achieve it. But if you live long enough, everything is possible. Strength is necessary to ensure your own survival, but it is not the only thing that's needed." He pointed at the corpses on the floor and said, "Consider these people, who thought that they could do whatever they wanted with just a little bit of strength. In fact, they were just people who were bewitched by a taste of power. They can't see the risks, and they can't see the future." Alice asked, "But don't you always say that cruelty is the most important factor for survival?" Charles answered, "Cruelty is only a means and not an end." He pointed at Harper's dagger and said, "So-called cruelty and coldness is like this dagger. This dagger can protect you when you are in danger. If not for this weapon, you may have been killed just now. But if you believe yourself to be invincible with this dagger, then I can only say that you are too naive." Harper had only just experienced a scene that was too cruel to imagine. Now, after Charles's explanation, she gradually calmed down. "Ah!" Sister Bethany cried. "Ah!" Penelope echoed her. Screams came from Sister Bethany and Penelope, who had just woken up. They had just experienced a nightmarish violation. Now that they had awakened, they found that the nightmare hadn't ended. Charles did not intend to comfort them. He went to the kitchen and said, "It's not good to eat too much raw, cold food. Let's cook something hot." As he spoke, he turned on the stove and started to cook pasta. When she brought out the pasta to the table, Alice had to restrain herself from comforting her companions. Harper just sat quietly and did not reveal what she was thinking. "Since you have rested well, let's eat," Charles said, as he placed the pasta on the table. "So there are still times when you care about people," Alice remarked. "But are we going to eat amid this carnage?" She pointed at the bodies nearby. The bodyguards continued slowly bleeding to death. Harper thought about the wound she had inflicted on them with the dagger, and she did not regret it. She understood that this was a necessary path. It was better to experience and process trauma as soon as possible in this blighted world. Penelope's and Sister Bethany's faces remained pale as they remained in a state of shock. Charles called out, "If you guys don't eat and can't keep up with the team later, don't blame me." Hearing Charles's words, the girls struggled to the table. But when they saw the food, they immediately started vomiting. "Ew," Sister Bethany cried. "Ew, ew," Penelope retched. Alice's face was stark white. She pointed at the contents of the bowl and said, "Did you do it on purpose?" The pasta had been cooked very simply. Apart from some salt, Charles had also added some duck intestines he had taken when he collected supplies at the supermarket. To increase the taste, he added red chili pepper. He had done it on purpose, and the effect was just what he had intended. Alice's big, watery eyes were full of grievance. Just now, she had thought Charles was going to show his warmer side. Now it seemed like wishful thinking. The girls all had the same look in their eyes. "Are you a demon?" Alice asked. In the post-apocalyptic era, food is very important. Charles put a piece of dyed red duck intestine into his mouth and said, "There will be fewer and fewer opportunities to enjoy such delicious food in the future." A look of decisiveness settled on Harper's face. She then took a deep breath and came to the dining table. Charles glanced at her and said, "If you can't do it, then don't force yourself. But what you can do now might affect your future." Harper said firmly, "I will finish it." Consuming the meal was an excruciating ordeal, particularly when doing so surrounded by bloody corpses. Charles did not mind too much. Eating beside dead bodies was a common occurrence now. An argument over food and clean water could cause a dozen people to savagely fight to the death. If the young women experienced this in advance, they would be a step ahead in this dangerous world, and in the even more dangerous world to come. This was the chance that he gave them. If they couldn't grasp it, then he might cease any interaction with them. After he finished eating and returned to his room, Harper's hand trembled as she finally reached for her fork. After an hour passed, Neil came to Charles's residence with 2 bodyguards. When they saw the bodyguards, the girls immediately showed a desire to kill. Neil quickly explained the situation. Neil said, "I have broken off with her. Since I have decided to prioritize spreading power arts techniques to the army, there is not so much I need to borrow from her influence." Charles said calmly, "You didn't kill her?" If it had been up to him, no matter how beautiful a woman Haley was, she would have had to die. Neil smiled bitterly and said, "I've had my fill of death after seeing the slaughter here." Charles shook his head. All of Haley's questionable actions have been undertaken just to protect herself. But if she still had the intention to take revenge, she would prove to be Neil's scourge. Sometimes, she would feel guilty, of course. Hatred alone didn't always confirm the evil desires in a person's heart. Neil explained, "I came to ask you to join me. If the 2 of us combine our strength, we will be able to establish a powerful force. Then we will become the people who set the rules." Charles merely shook his head. "My path is to provide a safe environment for myself and the people around me. Also, I want to eliminate those who threaten our lives. Your path is full of greater sacrifices." Neil had also experienced the depths of evil in people's hearts. But in Charles's opinion, he retained too many beautiful fantasies about human nature. Therefore, Even if he admired Neil, it was impossible for him to walk the same path as him. Neil said disappointedly, "That's true. There are many dangers that I must face on this path. I fear the ancient power families will treat me as their enemy because they believe these cultivation techniques should be the foundation of their own exclusive power in this chaotic world. I have broken their advantage." He knew what kind of enemies he would attract if he used his full strength. He also knew how dangerous his actions were. Still, he had no intention of giving up. Charles patted his shoulder and smiled. "If I manage to build my own paradise, you can come and join me then if you need protection." "Thank you in advance," Neil said. "By the way, I have a trick to teach you. Consider it a reward for your promise." Charles replied, "Ordinary moves are no longer useful to me." Neil said, "It's not an ordinary technique. It's a forbidden technique. In our ancient power family, there are some techniques that had existed for a very long time, but could no longer be used. As I understand it, these techniques became useless because we didn't have enough potential energy. Now that the heavens and earth have changed, these techniques should be able to be used again." Charles's eyes lit up. Ordinary moves were indeed useless to him, but if this was a secret of an ancient power family that had been passed down for thousands of years, it might be a way to increase his strength. According to the speculation of later generations, there had once been an era full of vitality on Earth, and the energy practitioners of the Energy Dynasty had worked miracles. However, due to the disappearance of this vitality, many of these techniques could no longer be used. But now things had changed. Neil thought for a while and said, "Last time, when you practiced power arts with me, I could tell that your combat skills were honed on the knife edge between life and death. Ordinary moves are helpful to ordinary people, but to you, they are a restriction. But this one move is very suitable for you." As he spoke, he stretched out 2 fingers and lightly drew a line across the table. Charles moved closer to look and found that there was now a long, deep scratch on the table's surface. Neil hadn't used much thunder energy just now. It had damaged the table, but was this move worth it for him to use? Looking at Charles's puzzled expression, Neil said, "This technique is called innate sword energy. It generates a sword energy in one's body and then continuously hones it. As time passes, this sword energy grows sharper and stronger until it becomes invincible." Charles asked, "Can it only be used once?" Neil smiled and said, "No, Charles. Instead of saying that the technique nurtures sword energy, it would be more accurate to say that it turns one's body into a scabbard, allowing one to contain even more powerful sword energy. If there's any weakness to the innate sword energy technique, it's the fact that this move is too exclusive, and it could affect the cultivation of other ancient power arts moves." Charles's eyes lit up. "I want to learn this." His foundation was not power arts. Power arts were just a trick he used to fool others. The Essence Talisman and ancient books were his foundation. The innate sword energy technique would not interfere with cultivation because Charles did not practice it. Neil said, "Before learning this move, there's one thing I have to remind you of, and that is that this technique can only be learned by our Neil family's core disciples. It absolutely cannot be taught to outsiders." Charles frowned. "Do you want me to join your family?" Neil shook his head. "What I mean is, if you learn this move, you must be prepared to be hunted down by those stubborn old fogies of mine. If you want to spread it, you must also be prepared." Charles smiled. "Of course." It was a good deal to be able to trade for a trump card with such little difficulty. After Neil taught Charles the innate sword energy, Charles was pleasantly surprised to find that the power of the technique was far beyond his expectations. In fact, innate sword energy didn't have an upper limit. In theory, it could be stacked infinitely, limited only by one's thunder energy level and physical endurance. The process of increasing the innate sword energy's power was more like a process of tempering one's body. The technique did exact a toll. If it was exercised too lightly, the meridians in his arm would be completely broken. And if it was exercised too heavily, the meridians throughout his entire body would explode and kill him. It was a toll Charles could bear. Charles thought, "The wisdom of the ancients is indeed not to be underestimated. Perhaps many things are outdated, but there will always be some bright pearls to find. Even after enduring the long river of time, they will still be able to bloom with dazzling radiance." The more Charles cultivated, the more he could feel the frightening power of the innate sword energy. There were many methods described in the ancient book, and some of them were even stronger than Neil's forbidden technique. However, if one wanted to combine quickness and sharpness, nothing beat the innate sword energy method. After learning the skill, Charles chatted with Neil for a while. Then the military finally arrived. The three girls had originally wanted to follow Charles because they knew that the army might not be their safest option. After all, the army would not take special care of them. They needed to protect too many people. Charles only needed to protect the few of them. However, Harper had successfully persuaded the two others to leave. Harper argued, "You want someone to protect you, but on what basis does he protect you? Your looks? He doesn't lack women now, and he won't lack women in the future. Even if he toys with you, he doesn't necessarily have to be responsible for you. Why do you feel that you are special? Rather than shamelessly following him, it's better to think about how to play your role. The biggest connection between us and Charles is Lena. That's the currency we must bind him to us in the future." After Harper's persuasive speech, Penelope and Sister Bethany agreed to travel on with the army. Before leaving, Charles told Harper, "If you encounter a problem that you cannot solve, you can ask Neil for help. I will repay the favors he grants, but do not treat him as your fairy godmother. Also, you can trust your two best friends, but do not forget to be on guard." He was willing to help Neil, but he did not want to have too much to do with him. Personal debt was the hardest to repay. If Neil owed Charles too much, Charles wouldn't be able to free himself of the entanglement. Becoming a life-and-death brother with a saint was a very frustrating prospect in this world. Harper nodded, indicating that she understood. When the army arrived, Haley angrily rebuked the soldiers. "Do you know how late you are? You're a day and a night past the scheduled time. Do you know how many people can die if they just wait for such a long time?" Only 2 loyal bodyguards were left beside her. Neil, who was the strongest among them, had abandoned her. Moreover, after the incident at Charles's residence, she had doubts about these 2 supposedly loyal bodyguards. She was in a state of extreme anxiety. She itched to find someone to blame. The appearance of the army provided her with a convenient scapegoat. She knew they would never harm civilians and would risk their own lives to protect them. This was common knowledge. There was no reason to fear abusing them. However, just as she was about to continue complaining, a gun barrel pressed sharply against her forehead. A young soldier said in a cold voice, "The reason we were delayed for so long is because of you people, who only know how to complain and can't cooperate. If you have any more bitching to do, don't blame my bullets for solving the problem." A line of cold sweat flowed down Haley's forehead. This was the first time she had been threatened at gunpoint. Compared with the prop weapon she had used during filming, the deterrence factor of a real gun was undoubtedly much stronger. The bodyguard beside her shouted angrily, "What are you guys doing? Don't you know who this is? You're asking for serious punishment from your superiors." The young soldier said calmly, "If you people drag down this retreat, you will cost even more lives. If you continue to anger me, I will kill every person impeding this mission before any military punishment can descend upon me. I will not leave one alive." Everyone was stunned by his words. Who would dare to provoke a person who wasn't afraid of death? At that moment, a red light suddenly emanated from the young soldier's body. He stretched out his hand, and a red fireball and a dark blue fireball appeared in his palm. Intense heat and a cold, gloomy feeling spread out simultaneously, making people shudder. Awakened. He had actually awakened. The scene shocked Haley, and the 2 bodyguards in particular, because they were not sure if the army could afford to punish an awakened soldier for killing troublemakers. Officer Tony Hughes was overjoyed and asked, "What's your name?" "Sir, my name is Lewis Harvey," cried the young soldier. Hughes said solemnly, "Harvey, I now grant you the authority to execute anyone who adversely affects the evacuation. From now on, Your actions are on my orders." This meant that Hughes would bear all the consequences of Harvey's actions. These words made Haley even more furious, but she did not dare say anything. She sensed that the whole exchange was aimed at her. Witnessing the incident, Neil thought, "Now I understand how wrong my decision was." Making use of the influence of celebrities to spread the cultivation method to more people had seemed reasonable at the time, but compared with Charles's suggestion, it was a stupid strategy. After parting, Charles brought Alice and Sister Bethany home. It was time for him to get his parents. On the way, Alice could not help but ask, "Given the state of things, can the Army really hope to stabilize the overall situation and inspire the hearts of the people?" Charles thought, "I don't blame her for being so hopeless. She's seen too much darkness lately. I don't know the answer to her question. In this chaotic world, can the Army maintain their former resolve and effectiveness?" Charles had told her in this era, strength was everything. The role of firearms had gradually been replaced by the abilities of the paranormals. As time passed, the position of the Army would grow weaker. He finally answered, "It's impossible to maintain order, but the basic framework is still viable. No ordinary person, not the strongest muscle man from the gym or toughest thug from the streets, can compare with a soldier who has undergone professional training. In terms of adaptability to danger and effective teamwork, the Army is still paramount." Alice asked, "And what about you?" Charles was not a soldier, but his martial skills surpassed those of any military man. He replied, "I'm the exception that proves the rule." Many people had believed that when the apocalypse came, the Army would fall apart. Some even thought that they might become the rulers of their own vast regions. Charles, who had experienced the apocalypse for an additional 10 years, knew the truth. In all parts of the world, heroes rose together, and countless experts emerged to fight for the soul of the ravaged land. However, in terms of overall strength, the Army was always the most powerful player. There were many factors affecting the activation of the Awakened, but the Army counted the highest concentration of these superpowered humans among their ranks. Later, genetic vaccines and super-evolved warriors would appear, but the most powerful scientists would remain in the Army. Basically, the outcome of provoking the Army, no matter the strength of the provocateur, would be death. Charles had experienced the deepest despair, exploited the most miraculous opportunities, and almost reached the peak potential of the human race. The diabolically lucky Leonard Shaw had tried to neutralize him multiple times, but Charles had been able to escape time and time again. He had been struggling for 10 years, waiting for the chance to kill him. However, Shaw wasn't alone. Shaw controlled the army of the capital and was backed by his powerful family. He wasn't a lone target. If Charles wanted to deal with him, he had to have the power to deal with the army as well. Charles looked at the sky and stopped the car. "It's getting dark again," he thought. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was growing dark at a rate perceptible to the naked eye, and in less than 10 minutes, it would be pitch black. Such bizarre meteorological activity would have sparked widespread panic in the past. But in the post-apocalyptic world, it was depressingly ordinary. After dark, the outdoors became very dangerous. Many mutated insects and ferocious beasts would emerge from the wilderness, searching for food. Even Charles dreaded the night. Of course, if Sister Bethany could awaken, that would change things. Bethany was single-minded and very serious about her cultivation. Her progress had been very fast. Although she was still relatively weak, at least she could avoid becoming a burden. The sky suddenly lit up. In the distance, a mushroom cloud bloomed, heralding an intense light that seemed to illuminate the entire world. "Another nuclear explosion? How many people are going to die?" Alice cried. "I've heard that there are enough nuclear bombs around to destroy the world 100 times over. If someone with access to them gives the order to attack, what chance is there for any of us?" Charles's eyes shone with killing intent. The nuclear explosion had reminded him of the way things really worked. Those who could wield such a deadly weapon were all people with high positions and power. Even in this post-apocalyptic world, they managed to live very well. It was a popular misconception that nuclear weapons could literally explode the planet. In reality, they wiped out all life by destroying the ecosystem, leaving the structure of the planet intact. But the Earth had changed. Nuclear weapons no longer possessed the power to destroy the modified ecosystem. The potential damage to the environment had been greatly reduced. The nuclear explosion inspired Charles, giving him the idea of establishing a force of his own. Separated from the military, backed by a powerful coalition, he could act against Shaw while maintaining a righteous position and not involving the army at all. After all, if he were to move against the army, no matter who won or lost, it would inevitably lead to a massive loss of life, tumbling the entire country into disaster. If his quest for revenge made him the enemy of the people, even his family would forsake him. What he wanted to do was to replace Shaw. He thought it over, an embryonic plan forming in his mind. "I'm not strong enough. Take it slow," he decided. The killing intent in Charles's eyes slowly dissipated, but the resolve in his heart grew stronger. "Charles, what's wrong?" Alice asked with concern. "Let's go find a place to rest." Charles's demeanor had filled her with an inexplicable fear. It made her wonder if she would lose him just like that. Charles calmed himself and said slowly, "I'm fine. Yes, let's find a place to rest. We should also find some supplies." His hand touched the mark on his arm. It was the emblem of the lightning cadaver serpent, one of the trump cards that allowed him to survive in this world. He could feel that the lightning cadaver serpent had reached the edge of full recovery. He was just short of the opportunity to truly awaken. When that happened, he would be able to go anywhere he pleased in this earlier stage of the apocalypse. While searching for a place to rest, Charles, Alice, and Sister Bethany entered a supermarket and were surprised to see a group of familiar faces. Charles looked at Aaron Taylor and his classmates. "I didn't expect you guys to still be alive," he said. When the Blood Crows had attacked, they'd abandoned him and ran away. Like Charles, they had randomly chosen the market for a respite. This reunion was the work of fate. Aaron said nervously, "I hope you don't hold a grudge against us. We accidentally got separated while we were avoiding the monsters." All of the students were nervous encountering Charles again. They said, "Yes, we just got separated by accident." "You're so strong. We knew you could take care of yourself." They had seen how terrifying Charles was in battle. It had left an indelible impression on them. Now they were afraid that Charles would want to settle the score. Alice was also very nervous, afraid that Charles would kill all her former classmates as a matter of principle. Charles said calmly, "I'm not interested in you guys. If you don't disturb me, everything's fine. Your actions have nothing to do with me." Since the meeting was a quirk of fate, he decided to give them another chance. Whether they could profit from it or not would depend on them. Thus, their future was still in their own hands. Of course, he did not have much patience and would not give too many second chances. Alice heaved a sigh of relief. These were her high school classmates after all. Charles's act of clemency made her feel much more at ease. After putting some food and water in the car, the three of them chose an empty room in an apartment above the supermarket as temporary living quarters. After arranging for Bethany to guard the door, Charles took Alice in his arms with a wicked smile. Alice's face flushed red. Yesterday, Charles had been such a beast. Today, she must punish him properly. Bethany, listening to the sounds outside the door, began to feel warm. Carnal instinct shivered through her body. The sheltered nun did not know what to do. She could only pray in her heart. "God, please forgive the evil thoughts of your believers." After praying, a doubt took root in her heart. Can God really hear my thoughts? She wondered. Downstairs, the students in the supermarket gathered for a discussion. Aaron said, "He spared us this time, probably because of Alice. We must not offend him again. We need to consider another matter now. Should we follow him and have such an expert to protect us? Our chances of survival would be much greater." Another classmate replied, "I agree. It is too difficult for us to survive without protection. After we left him, we encountered those groups of zombies while trying to find food. There were also mutated animals. I heard that the monsters in Cambridge were wiped out by the army last time. We really don't know how terrifying the outside world really is." Everyone nodded in agreement. It was almost impossible to stay in one place for long. Even if they kept hiding, they might not necessarily be able to avoid all dangers. They had encountered some monsters while foraging for food. Fortunately, they were mentally prepared, so they got through safely. If they had to go out again, they didn't know what they would encounter. A girl said weakly, "But our skills aren't good enough." At this point, everyone's expressions darkened. Aaron said, "Everyone, don't belittle yourself. We've dealt with some monsters along the way. Surely we can at least be helpful." Thus, everyone began to organize their supplies, hoping that they could be of some use. At that moment, the door to the supermarket opened again. Everyone was on high alert. When they saw that the newcomers were human, they heaved sighs of relief. The group of men wore singlets revealing their very developed muscles. It was obvious that they were not to be trifled with. However, their faces were not particularly fierce. They did not look like thugs. The students instinctively lowered their vigilance a bit. A slightly thinner member of the group, who looked more like one of the students, adjusted his glasses and said, "I didn't expect that someone would beat us to it." Hearing this, the classmates grew nervous. A more robust man said, "It's all right. There's still some food here. Eat something and find a place to rest." The tense atmosphere gradually dissipated. The man who looked like a student said, "Let me introduce myself. My name is Connor Mills. We heard that there's a military camp nearby, so we agreed to come. If you have nowhere else to go, let's go together." At this moment, Charles, who was listening upstairs, had a murderous look in his eyes. Once again, enemies meet on a narrow road. Back in school, Connor had taken advantage of the chaos to escape. Charles did not get the chance to kill him. No one could have expected that they all would coincidentally wind up here, all in the same place. A female student ogled the physiques of the muscular men and said excitedly, "If there really is a refugee camp, that would be great. We wouldn't have to hide from monsters all day long." A well-built person gave one a sense of security in this dangerous world. The infatuation she felt for the muscle men didn't hurt either. If she could not get close to Charles, could she not get close to these people? Despite their misgivings, they had considered following Charles, craving a sense of security. If there was another group of people willing to protect them, they would be happy to accept. Charles, who was hearing all of this in secret, sighed to himself. Those who can't become strong and only seek protection will be eliminated in the end.